Professor, political scientist, and historian director of the SOAS China Institute, Professor Tsang, is the guest of Spotlight Ukraine. Hello and welcome.
Hello.
So let's start with the so-called spy balloon over the territory of the United States. You probably know about this. So China declares that the balloon seriously deviated from just the planned course. But the Americans insist that the balloon was used by the Chinese military for spying. So whom to believe in this situation?
Well, if the Chinese government really send a balloon or allow a weather balloon to drift off course, the Chinese government could have afforded to tell the Americans or others that one of their balloons have gone astray, and therefore they can expect that they will drift into their airspace without creating a diplomatic incident. Or alternatively, they could have found a ways to lower the balloons so that the Americans can see that it is just a meteorological one. They did neither. So I think the American suspicion is much more likely to be correct than the Chinese government's explanation.
And by the way, the officials from the United States, they claim that China uses aerostats for spying purposes, not just over the United States, but all over the globe. So if that is correct, what is the true purpose of that? Maybe they just want to provoke Americans to start a military confrontation, especially knowing the serious situation between China and Taiwan these days.
Well, the Chinese government certainly would not have wanted the balloons to provoke a war with the United States. China does not want to have a war with the United States at this stage over Taiwan or any other issue. The simple reason is that China does not feel that it has the capacity to win in such a contest with the United States at the moment. They will wait until they are ready. But they may well, in fact, be sending out these balloons because they can and because they want to supplement the satellite images that they are already collecting. The Chinese are not the only ones who use aerial surveillance for intelligence purposes. The United States flies spy planes up and down the China coast on a regular basis and occasionally over Chinese airspace. And the Chinese government has wanted to return that favor to the Americans for quite a long time.
So you think it's just a regular spy routine between the biggest countries in the world?
Yes, I'm afraid that it is the mundane explanation that both sides realize the other is the single most important country that they will have to deal with. And therefore, they are spying on each other on a regular basis.
And now let's talk a bit about the third country, which is also one of the biggest in the world. If we talk about the resources, we talk about Russia. So the Japanese intelligence agency stated the message that China is probably supplying these days Russia with the military aid. So, and if we consider this situation, what is China for Ukraine? Friend or foe?
China's, or rather Xi Jinping's position to the Russian invasion of Ukraine from the beginning is one of declaring neutrality, supporting Putin, but paying no price. You being in Ukraine will know that Ukraine actually had good relationship with China before the invasion. Ukraine was a major supplier of feed grain to China and therefore a source of food security to China. So they don't really want you to be engaged in a war that will cause disruptions to the food production and supply. But Xi Jinping has a very strong personal relationship with Putin, and he decided to support Putin. What he has also decided is that this support, officially with no limits, in fact has very clear limits which is that China will not do anything to support Russia if that will trigger secondary sanctions. So we have seen China not providing finished weapon systems to Russia, but spare parts and other technologies that can be used, which will not trigger secondary sanctions, will be supplied to the Russians.
Yes, thank you. So China is monitoring the reaction of the West during every single act in the Russia's war in Ukraine. And there is a serious threat of the new war in Asia. You've already said that China can start some military actions whenever the country is ready. So how serious is that? And is there gonna be the readiness in the upcoming 1 or 2 or 3 years?
Well, the Chinese government under Xi Jinping is committed to take Taiwan when China is ready and able to do so, but it would also like to do so at acceptable level of cost, and therefore it is unlikely to want to provoke a war across the Taiwan Strait before China can demonstrate that it has overwhelming military superiority that will enable it to subdue Taiwan before the Americans can interfere militarily. The Chinese calculate that the Americans are likely to militarily interfere in the event of China using force against Taiwan. So they are indeed paying a lot of attention to the war in Ukraine, both in terms of how the weapon systems perform in Ukraine, as well as how the US and other Western countries react in their support to Ukraine. They will be seeing whether the same kind of support might be applied to Taiwan and how they can deal with it.
But at the same time, China doesn't want to trigger the United States or the Western countries for a new way or step of sanctions. Am I right?
Yes, that is absolutely correct. They don't want sanctions against China at the moment. And that's why there is a limit, I would say fairly clear limits, as to what China will do to help Russia, in spite of the declarations that the friendship and support is unlimited.
Thank you, Mr. Tsang. Professor Steve Tsang, the historian director of the SOAS China Institute, was the guest of Spotlight Ukraine. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Latest news, trends, and analytics on all about Ukraine. Like, share, and subscribe. Any questions, proposals, and comments, contact us via email.